You ever have your whole life crumble in front of you, piece by piece, until you don't even recognize the man staring back from the mirror? My name is Raymond Holbrook. 3 months ago, I was worth nearly $7 million. Today, I'm about to tell you how losing every last cent led me to something that changed everything. When I say everything, I mean my family, my business, my home, my pride, all gone. Ripped from me by the two people I trusted most, my ex-wife, Veronica, and her lawyer boyfriend, Dennis Caulfield. You might think you've seen betrayal before, but until you've stood in a courthouse hallway watching the woman you loved for 22 years smirk while her new man straightens his Italian suit and laughs in your face, you have no idea what betrayal feels like. Rye, you're pathetic, she said. Those words, they hit harder than any punch I've ever taken. 20 years of marriage, and you never saw this coming, some businessman you turned out to be. Dennis just smiled. Nothing personal, Raymond, he said, that smug grin never leaving his face. Well, actually, I guess it is personal now. Then they both laughed. Their laughter echoed down the marble hallway like knives scraping glass. I stood there in my only remaining suit, holding what was left of my dignity, while everything else, everything I'd built, was stripped away. My company, my savings, my six-bedroom colonial in Westchester, even custody of my twins, Mason and Sophia, all gone. Sue me, Veronica called out over her shoulder. Oh, wait, you can't afford a lawyer anymore, she smiled. I'm untouchable now, Ray. Dennis made sure of that. And she was right, at least for a while. 3 months later, I was sitting in a mildew-smelling studio apartment, counting the last $1,000 I had to my name. I'd gone from private country clubs and charity galas to eating instant noodles for dinner. The silence in that apartment was loud, deafening, the kind that makes you wonder if you even exist anymore. But then, something unexpected happened. It started with a memory, a flicker from my childhood. My grandfather, Eugene Holbrook, a quiet man who worked the line at Chrysler for 40 years, had once opened a small savings account in my name the year I was born. $50, that's all it was supposed to be. I figured, why not close it? Maybe I could buy myself one good meal before the lights got shut off. So I walked into the bank, stood in line behind a couple arguing about overdraft fees, and finally stepped up to the counter. The teller asked for my ID, typed my name into her computer, and then she froze. Her face went white as paper. One moment, Mr. Holbrook, she said, her voice shaking. She waved over her manager. Now I'm thinking, great, what now? Did Grandpa bounce a $50 check from beyond the grave? But then the manager walked up, looked at the screen, and just whispered, "Oh my God." He turned the monitor toward me. And when I saw that number, when I realized what had been quietly compounding interest since 1960, my knees nearly gave out. The account balance was enough to change everything. But before I tell you how that discovery rewired my entire life, you need to understand who I was before it all fell apart, because you can't appreciate the fall without knowing how high the climb was. Back in 2004, I was 25, fresh business degree, a pregnant wife, and $12,000 from my father's life insurance policy. That was it. That's all I had to start what would become Holbrook Plumbing Supplies. Every morning at 4:30, I'd kiss Veronica's growing belly, grab my thermos, and drive to a rented garage in Queens. I'd spend the early hours sorting inventory by flashlight until the first contractors rolled in. They came to trust me because I never missed a delivery, never overcharged, never made excuses. You're going to work yourself death, Veronica used to say, massaging my shoulders. The babies need a father, not just a provider. She wasn't wrong, but when Mason and Sophia were born during that November snowstorm, I held them both in my arms and promised I'd give them a better life than I ever had. We didn't have much when I was a kid. My grandfather, Eugene, worked the Chrysler line. My father, Harold, was a maintenance supervisor at a hospital. We weren't poor, but we were always one broken car away from panic. So when my twins came along, I swore, they will never feel that fear. By the time they turned 10, Holbrook Plumbing Supplies had exploded. We'd moved into a 15,000 square foot warehouse with 32 employees. My brother Tommy ran deliveries. My cousin Frank handled commercial accounts. And every Thursday morning, I met my accountant, Walter Drummond, at Murphy's Diner. He'd slide the quarterly reports across the table between our coffee cups and say, Ray, you've built something special. Most businesses fail in 5 years. You're going on 16 and growing 20% annually. He wasn't exaggerating. We just landed a massive deal supplying Brennan Construction Group, the biggest contractor in the tri-state area. That one account brought in $2 million a year. Add the rest of our commercial and retail clients, and we were pushing $8 million in revenue annually. After expenses and investments, I'd banked $6.7 million. That number used to feel like armor. I thought it meant safety. Turns out it was just a target painted on my back. Our house in Westchester was everything Veronica had dreamed of back when we were broke newlyweds. 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, a pool. She'd redesigned the kitchen 3 times, each version more expensive than the last. She quit her job after the kids started school and devoted herself to what she called managing our social presence. In plain English, she became the queen of the country club. Ray, it's not just about golf, she'd tell me. It's where deals happen, where the right people meet. And to be fair, she was right. A few contracts had come through connections I made there, but I never had time to attend those events myself. I was always working, always chasing growth. Veronica handled the lunches, the charity galas, the wine tastings. That's where she met Dennis Caulfield, the hotshot lawyer she would eventually trade me for. She mentioned him casually at first. His firm handles all the high net worth divorces, she said one night, laughing over a glass of wine. Made partner at 35. Can you imagine? I couldn't, because I was too busy actually working. My days started at 5 a.m. and ended around 8 p.m. Saturdays were paperwork. Sundays were for catching up on calls. Mason was studying business at Boston College, following in my footsteps. Sophia was at NYU for marketing. Their combined tuition, $140,000 a year. I paid it gladly. They were good kids, focused, ambitious, but distant. They texted me about money or schedules more than anything else. Veronica handled the emotional side, the calls, the parent weekends, the updates. I once overheard Sophia say to her friend, Mom says Dad loves that warehouse more than he loves us. That one hurt, but I brushed it off, told myself this was the price of success. I was building something for them. Every late night, every missed game, every postponed vacation, it was all for their future. My father used to tell me, nobody lies on their deathbed wishing they'd spent more time at work, son. I should have listened, but I didn't. I was too busy ignoring the growing cracks in my marriage, the glass of wine Veronica always had in her hand, and the way she started treating our home like a hotel. I thought we were building an empire together. I didn't realize she was preparing its demolition. Tuesday, March 14th. The date is burned into me forever. Our 22nd wedding anniversary. For once, I left the warehouse early, 3 p.m. sharp. I had 24 roses on the passenger seat and a reservation at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where I'd proposed all those years ago. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into the driveway was a black BMW. Dennis's BMW. The same one Veronica had shown me at the club 2 months earlier, bragging about the custom leather interior. The second thing I noticed, the bedroom curtains, drawn in the middle of the afternoon. I stood in the foyer for a full minute, roses in my hand, heart in my throat. Then I heard it, laughter. Not nervous laughter, not guilty laughter, the kind that comes from comfort, from repetition, like they'd been doing this for a while. I didn't go upstairs, I didn't scream or break anything. I just walked out, sat in my truck, and waited. 3 hours later, I watched Dennis Caulfield walk out my front door at 6:30, adjust his cufflinks and kiss my wife goodbye on my porch. She waved to him in the silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas. When I finally went inside at 8, she was cooking dinner, freshly showered, humming. "You're late," she said without looking up. "Anniversary or not, you could have called." The next morning at 9:15 a.m., while I was in the middle of a staff meeting, a process server walked into my conference room. 32 employees watched as I was handed a manila envelope. "Raymond Holbrook?" "Yes, you've been served." Inside were the papers that would dismantle my entire life. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it's the only place solid enough to build something real again. Because what I found in that old savings account wasn't just money, it was a message, a secret, a test left behind by a man who saw the world more clearly than I ever did. And when I unlocked what my grandfather had built, I realized everything I'd lost, my home, my business, my pride, was just the beginning. Beat. The woman who thought she'd destroyed me, the lawyer who thought he'd won, they have no idea what's coming next. Because Eugene Holbrook, my quiet, factory working grandfather, was about to reach out from beyond the grave and turn his broken grandson into the most unlikely man of all, a man with nothing left to lose. Soft fade. To understand what he left me, you need to see what was hidden behind that account. And trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of what happened next. ID 5873 variant standard titled The Discovery That Changed Everything. You ever watch your entire life burn down, slowly, piece by piece, and think there's no way it could get any worse, only to realize you were wrong? That was me, Raymond Holbrook, the man who once had everything, money, family, success, and lost it all in a single stroke of betrayal. But what I didn't know then was that my downfall was about to lead me somewhere I could have never imagined, something buried deep in the past, something my grandfather left behind. And the moment I discovered it, my life changed forever. It started in that courtroom. The sound of the judge's gavel still rings in my head. My brother Tommy stood beside me, fists clenched, ready to tear someone apart, but I waved him off. My hands were steady as I opened the envelope, the one that carried the final blow. Inside were accusations that read like a crime novel: abandonment, emotional abuse, financial manipulation, hidden assets, infidelity. Every single word a lie, a carefully crafted masterpiece of destruction, courtesy of Dennis Caulfield, my ex-wife Veronica's new lover, and her attorney. When we met for the first hearing, Dennis made sure it was held in his office, a flex, a power play to remind me who controlled the battlefield now. Veronica sat beside him, radiant in a new designer suit and diamond earrings I'd never seen before. She couldn't even meet my eyes. My client has been suffering in silence for years, Dennis began, his voice smooth, his hand casually resting on her arm. Your workaholism, your emotional absence, your prioritization of money over family, we have documentation going back 5 years. Documentation? My lawyer, Paul Redfield, frowned. What documentation? Dennis smiled, the kind of smile that knows it's already won. He reached down and lifted a box the size of a small coffin. Inside, journals. Handwritten pages supposedly kept by Veronica, describing years of neglect, photos of me at work during family events, bank statements with suspicious transfers, affidavits from country club members claiming they'd witnessed my verbal aggression. I remember whispering, "This is fiction." My voice cracked. "Veronica, tell them this is a lie." She finally looked at me then, her eyes cold as ice. "The only lie," she said, "was pretending our marriage meant something to you. Dennis helped me see the truth." What I didn't know at the time was that Dennis's forensic accountant was his cousin. That fact didn't come out until much later. By then, the damage was done. He testified under oath that I'd been hiding assets offshore, undervaluing the business, manipulating income reports. Every denial I made cost me thousands more in legal fees. Every hour of defense drained what little I had left. Paul was drowning, outgunned, outnumbered, and maybe even afraid of Dennis's influence. Because Dennis wasn't just a lawyer, he was a name. He golfed with judges, dined with CEOs, and smiled his way through every loophole the system allowed. "Ray," Paul whispered to me during one break, "they're requesting full custody of the twins." "Full custody?" I laughed bitterly. "They're 19. They're adults." "Legal adults who are still in college," Paul said. "That makes them dependent. It affects support calculations." And that's when I learned Dennis was golf buddies with Judge Martin Brennan, the same man I'd voted for, the one who'd promised fairness and family values. I believed him once. But sitting there in that courtroom, watching him nod along to every word Dennis said while brushing off our objections like they were gnats, I realized the truth. Justice isn't blind. It's for sale. Veronica's tears came right on cue. Years of rehearsing had turned her into an actress. She spoke of my controlling behavior, of how I isolated her from friends, of the fear she'd lived in under my roof. She described me like I was a monster wearing a wedding ring. She even said I'd made her feel worthless. This coming from the same woman who'd spent $40,000 on a kitchen remodel because the marble color didn't photograph well for her social media posts. Then came the final betrayal. Mason and Sophia, my twins, they submitted letters that claimed I'd been absent, cold, obsessed with money. Reading their words felt like being stabbed slowly, every sentence another inch deeper. And the worst part? They believed it, because Dennis and their mother had fed them the story piece by piece until even my children didn't know who I was anymore. The final hearing lasted 6 hours that erased 22 years of my life. Dennis painted me as a fraud, a man who'd hidden millions while emotionally destroying his family. When Judge Brennan read his ruling, the words barely made sense at first. Veronica was awarded the house, the business, all savings accounts, full custody, and I was ordered to pay maximum support, calculated not on my current income but on what I used to earn. When it was over, I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a 20-year-old Honda Civic I'd kept for sentimental reasons. As we exited the courtroom, Dennis turned to me. "This is justice," he said loudly, smirking. Then, leaning closer so only I could hear, "She tastes amazing, by the way." I'll never forget those words. The studio apartment on Belmont Avenue cost $800 a month. It had peeling paint, a view of a brick wall, and the constant smell of curry drifting up from the restaurant downstairs. After 3 months there, I knew every crack in the ceiling, every water stain, every hour the upstairs baby cried. My diet? Instant ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, whatever was on sale at the dollar store. But the worst part wasn't the hunger. It wasn't even the poverty. It was the invisibility. Former employees crossed the street when they saw me. Country club members pretended not to recognize me. Even Tommy, my own brother, had to keep his distance. Veronica had kept him on at the company. He needed that job to feed his kids. We met once, secretly, at a highway rest stop. He looked at me like a man torn in half. "I'm sorry, Ray," he whispered. "She watches everything. Dennis told her you're planning something. If I get caught talking to you, I'm done." And just like that, even my last ally was gone. My bank account balance in $43. The court had garnished my wages from the temp warehouse job I'd found, 70% taken for alimony and back support. 70%. Judge Brennan had based the amount on my previous income, not the $12 an hour I made now. Paul tried to file for modification, but that required another retainer. Money I didn't have. Mason wouldn't answer my calls. Sophia picked up once. She was crying. "Mom showed us proof," she said, "of your affairs, the offshore accounts, the money you hid." None of it existed. But Dennis's forgeries were good enough to make them real in her eyes. I hung up the phone and sat there for an hour, 45 years old, and completely, utterly alone. One Thursday night, desperate to feel something, anything, I decided to visit my old storage unit, the one thing Veronica didn't know existed. I'd rented it years ago under my father's name to store his old belongings. Most of it was junk. Rusty tools, faded photo albums, his baseball card collection, worthless. But then I found it, a shoebox labeled "Important Papers." Inside, among yellowed receipts and an old driver's license, was something that made me sit down right there on the cold concrete floor. A savings passbook. First National Trust. Dated January 15th, 1960. The name on the account? Raymond Eugene Holbrook, and paperclipped to it, a note, written in my grandfather's careful, blocky handwriting. "For my grandson's future, do not touch except in dire need, Eugene Holbrook." I just stared at it. I remembered him vaguely, his rough hands, the smell of oil from the factory, the way he'd slip me $1 when my parents weren't looking. "Save half, spend half," he'd always say. "Time makes money grow, Raymond. Remember that." I hadn't remembered. Not until now. The next morning, I put on my last clean dress shirt, the one I saved for job interviews, and drove to the Chase branch that had once been First National Trust. The building was unrecognizable now. Glass, steel, modern art on the walls. Nothing like the old brick building my grandfather would have known. I stepped up to the counter. The teller was a young woman named Patricia. Bright smile, polite voice. How can I help you today, sir? I have an old account, I said, sliding the worn passbook across the marble counter. From 1960. I'd like to close it out. She smiled, typed the information, then frowned. Typed again. Brows furrowed deeper. Let me check our archive system, she said softly. A few moments later, she stood frozen, staring at her screen. Then she looked at me, pale as a ghost. Mr. Holbrook, could you wait just a moment? I need to get my manager. Great, I thought. Another dead end. Maybe the account was closed decades ago. Maybe it was turned over to the state. My life was a series of almosts. Why should this be any different? But when Patricia returned, she wasn't alone. Behind her was Theodore Grayson, the branch manager. Late 50s, gray hair, expensive watch, but there was something in his eyes, unease, like he'd seen something that didn't make sense. Mr. Holbrook, he said quietly, could you step into my office? Please, we need to discuss this privately. His office was all mahogany and glass, certificates lining the wall, soft jazz playing low in the background. He set my grandfather's passbook on his desk like it was made of glass. I've been in banking 30 years, he said, and I've never seen anything quite like this. He began typing, fast, precise. His face changed as he read, once, twice, then again, slower this time. Mr. Holbrook, he finally said, voice trembling slightly. Flo, this account is extraordinary. He pulled out a calculator, scribbled numbers on a legal pad. Your grandfather didn't just open a savings account, he continued. He opened something called a Century Growth Account. It was a short-lived program First National Trust offered in 1960. Compound interest at 7.5% annually, locked for a minimum of 45 years. I blinked. 7.5%? For 45 years? He nodded. The bank honored it through every merger. The terms were untouchable. No one could access it, not even you, until you turned 45. I just sat there staring. I turned 45 3 months ago. He smiled faintly. Then, Mr. Holbrook, this account just became yours. He swiveled the monitor toward me, and when I saw the number glowing on that screen, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. 4,847,539.28, $4,847,539. From 50. That's impossible, I whispered. It was $50. Theodore nodded, printing out a breakdown chart. $50 compounded annually at 7.5% for 64 years, he said. Your grandfather chose the perfect instrument at the perfect time. By year 20, it was worth $212. By year 40, nearly $9,000. And after 64 years, he leaned forward. You're a very wealthy man, Mr. Holbrook. And that's when it hit me. All the betrayal, all the pain, all the humiliation. Veronica's laughter, Dennis's smug grin, Judge Brennan's crooked gavel. They thought they'd buried me. But what they really did was clear the field. Because now, with this one miraculous discovery, my grandfather's final lesson, I wasn't just back. I was reborn. And the people who thought they'd taken everything from me, they had no idea what was coming next. ID 59274, variant standard, titled The Hidden Fortune Cinematic Voiceover Script. Have you ever lost everything, only to discover that the greatest treasure of your life had been waiting for you all along? When I walked into that bank, I was a broken man, divorced, disgraced, living in an $800 a month apartment that smelled like curry and regret. I had $40 in my wallet, a car that coughed more than it started, and a name that no longer meant anything. The world had taken everything from me, my business, my family, my dignity. But what I didn't know was that a man who died decades ago had already written my redemption. Theodore, the bank manager, sat across from me, his hands trembling slightly as he opened an old folder. Mr. Holbrook, he said, his voice soft but steady, your grandfather didn't just open a savings account. He left behind something extraordinary. At first, I thought he was mistaken. A forgotten passbook from 1960, $50 deposited, compounding for 64 years. It sounded like a cruel joke, the kind the universe plays when you're already down. But as Theodore turned the computer screen toward me, my pulse froze. The number staring back at me didn't seem real. $4.8 million. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak, but the words collapsed in my throat. This can't be right, I whispered. It's absolutely correct, Theodore replied. Your grandfather set this account to compound at 7.5% annually. It's been quietly growing for 6 decades, but that's not all. He reached into his filing cabinet and pulled out another document, a thin, yellowed folder sealed with a rusted paperclip. This, he said, is the investment addendum to the account. Inside were instructions dated 1965, an order to purchase $100 worth of stock in a small textile company called Berkshire Hathaway. The name hit me like thunder. Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company. 5 shares purchased at $19 each, now worth over $8 million. Theodore looked at me carefully. Your grandfather was a man of incredible foresight. He created something that survived wars, recessions, and mergers. He built a fortune out of patience. And then he handed me an envelope. My name written on it in careful, fading handwriting. Inside was a letter. Dear Raymond, it began, if you are reading this, you have reached the age of wisdom and found yourself in need. I knew nothing of your future when I wrote this, only that life has storms and every man needs a harbor. I could hear his voice in my head, calm, steady, practical. I am a simple man who learned 3 truths, he wrote. Money is not wealth, time is. What is hidden cannot be stolen, and a man who seems to have nothing is often richer than one who shows everything. The words felt carved in stone. He spoke of a young man he once met, Warren, who taught him about value and patience. Maybe it will amount to nothing, he wrote. Maybe it will amount to everything. Use this gift wisely. Trust no one completely, not even those who share your bed. That last line, it burned, because he'd seen them coming decades before I did. The Veronicas, the Denises, the ones who smile while they sharpen their knives. Theodore cleared his throat. Mr. Holbrook, there's one more detail. If anyone had tried to access this account before your 45th birthday, all interest and gains would have been forfeited. And that's when it hit me. The irony. If Veronica and Dennis had found this during the divorce, their greed would have destroyed it all. They would have obliterated the fortune trying to claim it. The same people who stripped me of everything had, without knowing it, preserved the only thing that could save me. I laughed. A quiet, bitter laugh that turned into something else. Something colder. What do I do now? I asked Theodore. He smiled faintly. First, we protect your assets. Then, we plan your future. But until then, Mr. Holbrook, I'd keep this very, very quiet. And I did. For 2 weeks, I lived as if nothing had changed. Same ramen dinners, same broken couch, same sleepless nights. But every morning, I looked in the mirror and saw something new in my reflection. Power. Silent. Invisible power. When I finally made my move, I went straight to Arthur Blackstone, Dennis's former mentor, a man known in legal circles as the Reaper. Arthur listened to my story in silence, eyes narrowing with every detail. Dennis Caulfield, he muttered finally. Brilliant, ruthless, and completely without ethics. I taught him everything he knows. It's about time someone reminded him who the real master is. Within weeks, Arthur's team tore through Dennis's empire like wildfire. Hidden bank accounts, falsified affidavits, perjured witnesses, all of it surfaced. Dennis and Judge Brennan weren't just golfing buddies. They were partners in corruption, a ring of financial manipulation, judicial kickbacks, and fraudulent testimonies. The forensic accountant who testified against me? Dennis's cousin. Fake credentials. Fabricated data. When the FBI showed up at Dennis's office, I was already gone from my apartment, sitting quietly in a cafe across the street, coffee in hand, watching him being led away in handcuffs. Judge Brennan was next. Arrested the same afternoon. The headlines were everywhere. Prominent divorce attorney and judge arrested in corruption scandal. The city feasted on the story. Veronica called me that night, screaming, furious, hysterical. What did you do, Raymond? How is this possible? You had nothing. I took a long breath before answering. I had nothing you could see, I said. That's the difference between us. The silence that followed was better than any victory speech. The divorce ruling was overturned within months. The judge disbarred, the attorney disgraced, the liar exposed. Veronica was forced to return the house, the business, and what was left of the stolen money. But justice didn't end there. Dennis, desperate to save himself, turned on Veronica, confessing to everything, every fake document, every hidden lie, every moment she'd spent helping him destroy me. The woman who once claimed to be my victim was now revealed as my betrayer. When Mason and Sophia, my kids, finally came to see me, their faces were pale, eyes swollen from tears. Dad, we're so sorry, Sophia sobbed. She showed us proof. Fake bank statements, photos, everything. We believed her. We shouldn't have. I put my hands on their shoulders and smiled softly. You were children, I said. You believed the story that was easiest to believe. But now, you know the truth. 6 months later, I sold my company, Holbrook Plumbing Supplies, for $12 million. I didn't buy yachts or mansions. I bought peace, a modest 3-bedroom home, a quiet neighborhood, a life without noise. And then I created something in my grandfather's name, the Eugene Holbrook Foundation. Its mission? To teach working families the one lesson that built everything I had, the power of compound patience. Every month, I stand in front of a small class at the community center, factory workers, single parents, small business owners, and I tell them my story. Time, I say, is your greatest asset. Not what you earn, not what you own, but how long you let it grow. We've helped over 300 families start their own investment accounts, teaching them the simple truth my grandfather understood better than any billionaire. Wealth isn't about showing off, it's about security, stability, and silence. Tommy, my brother, runs the foundation now. The same brother who once had to stay away from me because Veronica controlled his paycheck. Now he calls me every day to report new families we've helped, new futures we've secured. As for Veronica, she works at a dental office now. Receptionist. Small town. Old Toyota. The diamond earrings are gone. The sparkle, too. Dennis is serving 3 years in federal prison. Brennan, 5. And a lost pension. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it comes, it arrives like thunder. And every night when I sit at my desk, I look at my grandfather's photo. His eyes kind but wise, his hands folded just like I remember. Next to it, that old savings pact, but alive. When young entrepreneurs visit me bragging about their overnight success, their crypto wins, their fast fortunes, I point to that photo. This man, I tell them, turned $50 into $13 million. Not through greed, not through luck, but through time, through patience, through knowing when to play the long game. They laugh at first, thinking it's a metaphor. Then I show them the proof. Their smiles fade. Their silence says everything. Before I go to sleep each night, I read that letter one more time. My grandfather's last line always echoes the loudest. Never let them see all your cards, Raymond. Never. He was right, because the best hand is the one nobody knows you're holding until the moment you lay it on the table and take everything. And somewhere out there, I know another man is sitting in the dark, feeling defeated, believing it's over. He has no idea that maybe, just maybe, his own hidden fortune is still waiting, buried beneath the dust of his failures, compounding quietly until it's time.